everyone, and welcome to the Do More of Your Money podcast, episode 170. Can't believe we've got this far, Craig. 169 last week, 170 this week. That's how it works. Yeah, that's exactly how it works. Good panel today. We've got a Q&A session. Got lots of questions coming from clients that we'd like to answer. I don't think there's any newbies on the podcast today. Everyone done that? I'm looking at Martin. I think this is our first podcast together.
It's our first one together, but it's been a while since I've been on, so I'm being brought back onto the show. So
got you
exciting
back in the
stuff. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Down to the topic of the podcast today. So it's Q&A. It's mainly around pensions. So we've got some pension experts on the session, and I think, Craig, I will start with you. In terms of question number one is, should I amend my pension drawdown rate when markets are so volatile? What is a safe withdrawal rate?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the latter regarding safe withdrawal rates. This has kind of changed over time, I think, and really it's understanding what the markets are doing at the same time. So in my head, a safe withdrawal rate would be between 3.5% and 4%. The idea behind that being, if you have underlying growth on your fund in fees and you're withdrawing an income at the same time, over time you're not going to deplete your fund too heavily, and it's built to last you over the duration of your retirement. So at that level, the negative impacts of decumulating your fund won't be as prominent, and it means you're probably going to have money left at the end. Now, when markets are down and markets are volatile, should you amend your drawdown rate? The answer is probably yes. In order to do that, we'd always recommend speaking to your advisor, because ultimately if you're thinking you're withdrawing £10,000 from a £200,000 pot, that's obviously a 5% withdrawal, but if that £200,000 pot falls, that £10,000 is going to have a higher percentage and therefore a bigger impact on your fund. There's also an element of sequencing risk. So sequencing risk is quite a broad term, but ultimately that's withdrawing on your fund when markets are buoyant. So if you're in a falling market and withdrawing funds, ultimately your units that you've got within your portfolio are going to be lower. Therefore, on the recovery on the upside of the market, when the market returns, you've ultimately got less units within your portfolio to get that upside back again. So it does need careful consideration, and I definitely recommend speaking to your advisor. But I'd always kind of stay within the 4% down as a safe withdrawal rate.
And I think what we would say to that, Craig, just to add to it from my perspective, is that's over a long period of time.
Yep.
Quite common. I may speak to a client and we may take a higher rate in the short term.
Exactly.
So you might take a higher rate and then reduce it over a period once, for example, state pension kicks in terms of income. And I think that's the one thing I would say is it's always worth chatting this through with your advisor. Yep. Because if you're taking slightly too much at the minute, that might not be a problem. That might just be something that they facilitated into your plan and then looking to reduce it over a period of time. The other area to consider is one, you only live once, and you tend to spend less as you get older.
Correct.
So as you get in your later life, you may actually look to withdraw that a bit further, and we can plan that in as well. So it's just worth, I think there's lots of different scenarios, but it's worth just discussing this sort of thoroughly with your advisor when you are setting up your income, because the idea is we don't know when we're going to die, and you want that pot to be sustainable. There's some people who want to ensure that pot's left for family. Some people don't. But this is where we can really support this.
I think it comes down to planning, and obviously we're big on goal-based planning and having a robust plan which is stress tested, so it's got the underlying elements of inflation. Or if there's a period of time where you need more income up front, for example, pre-state pension age, you might need to make up a high amount of income until age 67, going to 68. So it's having that robust plan and speaking to your advisor and having a real goal behind what you want to do. And within that goal, it should be stress tests to account for periods where either markets are down or indeed you need more money from your pot.
Great, thanks, Craig. Right, we'll flick over to a retirement question, Martin, but for you around ISAs. Is an ISA a flexible alternative to investing towards a retirement goal?
Certainly, I would say so, yeah, because again, you're getting the tax benefits of an ISA, which is obviously £20,000 for the ISA allowance for the year. So you can consider using obviously as much of your annual allowance for your pension first and foremost, and taking the tax relief from there. The ISA is an alternative option to that. Again, great benefits of the tax and building up your wealth, which can be withdrawn at a later date alongside your pension income as well. So they are great to use alongside the pension, but it's obviously the tax relief you get on contributions to your pension, which is certainly a great starting point. So definitely I would suggest, if you're not topping up, or if you have topped up your pension and used your annual allowance, certainly look to use your ISA allowance as well.
I think the good thing for ISA, particularly for younger clients as well, is obviously when you put your money into a pension, that's tied into the pension until minimum pension age, which is currently age 55. Whereas an ISA, if there becomes a scenario at age 40, or let's say, where you need, £5,000 to do your boiler, as a classic one that we always talk about, or purchase a new car, you've got access to that pot before age 55. So I think that's the flexibility component, particularly for younger investors, where it might be more beneficial than, let's say, putting a large amount into a pension, certainly from experience.
It is. It's when you're considering, especially giving advice, when you may, you might, someone might say, well, I've got £20,000, but it's a very different discussion if it's for retirement, if it's for a 30-year-old to a 55-year-old, where a 55-year-old, you might take advantage of your tax relief, as you say, Martin, but as a 30-year-old, they may say, actually, I want to invest, I want to save, but I want to have access. So that these are the conversations that you have to have, but there's nothing wrong with using such a great product in terms of the ISA and the tax-free growth on that as an aid towards your retirement. But as I said, it's all, once again, we always turn this round, but it's worth just discussing your circumstances with your advisor, because every time I give a bit of advice from an advisor perspective, I'm always looking at, well, what is your objective as a client, and how do I link this product to your objective? Yep. How does that match what you need to do? So if retirement is your objective, is a pension a better option than an ISA? There's benefits to both products, which you mentions it's one to definitely consider. Okay, Craig, Martin, you can share this, and George, you can jump in as well. What should I consider when deciding between retirement options such as an annuity or a drawdown? So let's picture this a little bit differently. I'm a client, just about to retire. I need a certain amount of income in retirement. What would we do as an advisor to consider the best product?
Yeah, I think fundamentally you need to understand what the client's got, existing sources. So I think in retirement, ideally what clients need is an element of fixed guaranteed income, which isn't going to reduce. So obviously state pensions is a good example of that, or defined benefit pensions. But indeed annuities are also an option for clients that, particularly this year, have probably become a bit more attractive. Annuities at a 14-year high, if you look at since 2008 or all the way through, at the end of 2022 they hit a real high, an uptick of 22% in annuities this year. So on average that's about £1,000 if you look across the board. So it's a massive sum of money, and annuities are brilliant for clients who need guaranteed underpinning their income. However, obviously the more you bolt onto an annuity, that annuity is going to drop. But also, if you're looking at succession planning and passing benefits on, there's a bit more rigidity in annuities, and you haven't got the flexibility you've got on drawdown. So ultimately, again, it comes down to client circumstances, client goals, and what they've got already. But they are good products in their own right. I think there's pros and cons to both, as we've discussed with ISAs before.
Yeah, I think the initial conversation would be your attitude to risk. Because if you're going to start off with, let's say, a cautious or defensive attitude to risk, you're more likely better off with the annuity. Whereas if you're willing to take a bit more risk and looking for that flexibility, again, based on your objectives, looking at a drawdown pension may be a more appropriate option as well. Plus, based on your existing wealth that you also have, again, we've spoken about ISAs and using them for retirement as well. It's looking at the whole client circumstance and objectives, as well as attitude to risk, to determine what's the best course of action for the client based on that.
We mentioned on safe withdrawal rates as well, 4%. Obviously annuities are in and around that at present, but again, you might not need that 4% for life. You might need a higher amount up front and then a lower amount from state pension age. And you can get flexible annuities, but often is the case, the standard annuity is a set amount of income for life. That could be indexed, it could not be. It could provide a certain amount of spouse's pension, but ultimately if flexibility is a goal and you've got other areas, other income sources in place, a drawdown pension for many clients is a suitable option. And again, a large reason why pension freedoms were brought in the first place back in 2015. So it's definitely a conversation to have. I think annuities are being phased out as time goes on, and there's definitely a focus on drawdown.
It's out of fashion, isn't it? I think it's one of these things where pension freedoms, when George Osborne made that change, prior to that change, it was you either bought an annuity, you took 25%, you bought an annuity, you had income for the rest of your life, or you use something called what we call capped drawdown, which is where the government, which is similar to drawdown at this minute in time, but the government effectively are dictating how much you can take as an income based on certain rates. Where now that flexibility of drawdown, where, as you mentioned, Craig, you can take slightly more now and then slightly less in the future. And I know I talk about this example on a regular basis, but a client of mine that I've set up, retired, 64 I think he was, 3 years away from retirement. Actually, might have been a bit younger than that, actually. 3 or 4 years away from his state pension age. So we took a slightly greater amount of money from his pension, and then actually we just reduced it last year to when his state pension kicked in. That took his withdrawal rate was quite safe anyway, but it drastically reduced the amount he was withdrawing. What's quite interesting about that client now is we're now talking about his wife retiring, and we're going to probably use his pension to facilitate that. She's got a final salary pension, so that's guaranteed income, but she needs slightly bit more until her state pension kicks in. And looking at the calculations behind it, it's safe to do it. And I think that's what drawdown allows you to do, allows you to have that flexibility, where if you didn't have that, it was actually, you've got to buy an annuity, or you've got to, you've got to take the whole cap drawdown rate, that these individuals probably wouldn't have been able to retire. So I think it's dramatically changed the outlook of pensions. But when you're considering what you want to do, from a retirement perspective, speak to us, because there's lots of different ways that you can facilitate flexibility.
I think there's one important point you missed on annuity withdrawal is within a drawdown pension you're going to be remain invested over 30 plus years over a regular retirement term, and I think that's really important, particularly if your withdrawal rates are low. That's probably going to promote good levels of growth in your underlying fund, and there's a real importance to being invested over the long term and compounding that growth over years, which is an important point to make between the two.
Just in terms of the portfolios, we talk a lot about the capital growth type investment portfolios. We've also got 2 income portfolios as well, which essentially allow you to remain invested in the underlying units, but receive a regular, what we would call a natural income. And your income in those portfolios is coming from dividends from companies. It's coming from the coupons that you get from bonds, be it government bonds, be it corporate bonds. It could be rental income from infrastructure, and what we're doing is we're distributing that out to clients and remaining the units within the portfolio invested. And we've done a lot of work in this area. We've got good traction in terms of investment in those portfolios. We've been building out how we construct them. A lot of those type of solutions are often very UK focused in terms of equity. UK equity markets are highest yielding market, often get a lot in high yield corporate bonds. What we've been able to do is partner with UBS and Waverton as well, and build solutions which have actually diversified the asset mix that we've got in the portfolios, because that's our philosophy and our approach. And we've done that without actually sacrificing income. We've actually grown the income through doing it as well. So when we're talking about solutions, we've got the capital growth range, but we've also got the income range in there as well.
Yeah, and that natural income can cover what you need. Yeah, and it can be a really great product for you. Craig, how could inflation affect my retirement?
Yeah, I think it's a big topic, particularly with inflation being as high as it has been over the last year. So ultimately, the purchasing power of your pension is going to reduce the higher the inflation. So if you look, the cost of goods. I think on this morning on the radio was a shopping this year's £20 shop last year is going to cost you about £23.50 this year. So that just proves, in the case of it's £3.50 more expensive for exactly the same thing. So just scale that over your retirement. There's a likelihood that £20 is not going to be what £20 is going to be in 30 years' time or 25 years' time, and it's being conscious of that. I think the key to it all is being invested in markets. Markets typically over long term will keep up and also outperform inflation and ultimately maintain your purchasing power of your pension, which can't be done if you're just sitting within a cash account, let's say, or an index pension. So that would be the key to it for us, and I think obviously one of the aims of the portfolio is over the long term to outperform any inflationary pressures that arise from the economy.
I think we've always over the many years talked about how do you get your money to grow faster than inflation. That's what you require, and I think it's become more relevant recently with as we seeing things. Very rarely you'd see things go 25 pence in a year from that used to be £1. So just little things that I've noticed. Yep. Even you used to get your yogurts for £1 and it's now £1.25. It's these sorts of things over time will affect, but I think it's very noticeable at the minute. But it's always something within an investor we're trying to basically outpace it. And sometimes it's more difficult when you've got in your high inflation times, but over the longer period we'd expect markets to do that.
I think that was one of the developments over the weekend in terms of Rishi Sunak just sort of suggesting to supermarkets that they take a voluntary cap in terms of some of their prices, because you're seeing it not just in the UK but in the US as well. These sort of jaws opening up. If you look at charts which show inflation coming down but stores actually keeping their prices high because they want to maintain the margins. Now if you're investing in those supermarkets and so on, then keeping the margins is a good thing, but if you're a consumer, it's a challenge. So that's one of the sort of political pressures that these type of companies are facing now. The fact that their underlying prices are coming down, but how much are they passing on?
Yeah, definitely. What for you, Martin? As I approach retirement, can I contribute all of my salary into a pension? I wouldn't say all, but can you?
Maybe not
can you put
all,
more?
but certainly the annual allowance is £40,000. Sorry, £60,000. Just changed, hasn't it? But yeah, so £60,000. So you certainly can. I would definitely suggest using as much of it as you're comfortable doing so, and obviously you have the employer contributions to contribute to that as well, which is fantastic. Again, if you consider retirement is what effectively everyone is really saving for, so you can have a comfortable retirement in the future, then putting away as much as possible from your salary into a pension is certainly advisable. It's what your financial advisor would tell you to do. But certainly, I think just as much as you can, not necessarily all of your salary, but also if you consider maybe years where you haven't used all of your annual allowance, speaking with an advisor and looking at the option of carry forward as well. So using your allowance from previous years is certainly something that can benefit moving forward as well.
Yeah, I think it's... I've done this a little bit recently in terms of, putting a little bit more on my pension than normal. I increased my contribution via a TP site, so I actually put a slightly more percentage than would expect. A lot of firms will consider matching as well, so wherever you're checking with your employer, if you put more in, will they match what you're doing?
Yeah.
But it's that tax relief, especially if you're potentially if you're going at the higher earner brackets, it can be really, it can make a
advantageous,
big difference, when you want to offset in tax and paying in your pension. So it's a great thing. So worth considering, worth speaking to your advisor about that type of thing. Craig, I have to ask you this question, although there's 3 qualified people in the room to give this. A lot of people have final salary pensions. Great product. Have to be considered as part of their retirement planning. For our viewers, final salary pension is effectively a pension that pays an income. But there is an alternative, which a lot of our viewers may have done, which is you can transfer that into what we call effectively a personal pension with ourselves and use the flexibilities. It's not right for everyone, but it's people may wish to consider it. What's the areas that you should look at if you do want to consider it?
I think if we look, and certainly from a regulator rule and what we have in-house, is we start from the notion that a transfer is not in the best interest of the client, and it's on us as the advisor to work with the client and ultimately prove why the client's better off moving. And for many clients, that's not the case. The conversations are very similar to what we were talking about with annuities earlier on, and that these final salary pensions were set up 30, 40, 50 years ago in some cases to provide clients with income in retirement. And that ideology is probably somewhat outdated as time moved on, much in the same way as annuities, and it doesn't give clients the flexibility to alter what they've got in retirement, but more importantly, I think for many clients is passing wealth on. And if we look at the values of these occupational pension transfers, not from an income perspective, but as a capitalised value, so a CETV, as many clients have got, they are life-changing sums of money that can impact not just the client's life, but indeed family's life thereafter. I think the starting point for us when we're looking at an occupational pension transfer or a final salary pension is, does the client need fixed income? If the answer to that question is yes, or likelihood is we'll not transfer it, that's probably the safest guaranteed form of income. Again, it's going to be indexed with inflation, so you're not going to get that pressure up to a cap. And also it's going to provide a spouse's pension. So if there is a need for guaranteed fixed income in retirement, we probably wouldn't recommend a client move their way. However, if they've got other sources in place, they've got maybe other assets that they can use in the first time which are less tax efficient, we could look towards moving them into a personal pension, and again utilising drawdown to provide more flexibility, better death benefits, investment over the long term. And I think there's multiples of pros and cons on each side, as there is with every decision we've talked about today.
Yeah, most of the files I read from yourself are done in the past are around clients that potentially don't need it, so don't need any income at all from this pot, and they've got other sources of guarantee that covers it. So if you've got maybe 2 or 3 of these types of pensions, it might be worth considering. Actually, is it worth transferring one of them and leaving the other? One final salary pension plus your state benefits, can probably cover your income, and then you can use the rest flexibility. The other areas is obviously considering husband and wife, whether in terms of partners, is one of you got a final salary that can cover the income.
We think we've got to take a holistic approach. We've got to consider
correct
risks, Is a client aware that when they move the pot of value could go up and down, they could run out of risk, the sequencing risk I've talked about. You know, do they understand the pros and cons of each side? Are they aware that the fund's going to be invested? And I think it's getting the client, one, can they afford to do it? Two, have they got the appetite to transfer out? And many clients do. But ultimately, over the long term, are you aware of what you're getting and maybe what you're getting where you are? And I think it's putting clients in an informed position and giving them the best advice off the back of that is really what we need to consider. But it does take into account everything the client has, because it's such a valuable source of income that, again, not all clients need. So there's a few things we need to think about.
Correct. Brilliant. Some good questions on late retirement there, actually, which hopefully useful for our viewers. In terms of understanding, you know, the options that you have when you are hitting retirement and how you can effectively sustain your income. I think we'll have one from each of you guys, and then we'll ask you on the investment side. But what would your sort of top tip, if I'm starting my retirement, what would be your top tip, Martin, for our clients in terms of what they should consider?
I think it depends entirely on your objectives. So if you've just reached age 55, I think what I tend to see a lot of is people looking to utilise their tax-free cash once they hit age 55. But I would say only really use that if there's an absolute need for it, because obviously the retirement pot itself is for your retirement up until, unfortunately, you pass away. It's why when we spoke about ISAs earlier, again, that could be used as an alternative to using the tax-free cash. Or you certainly don't have to take the full 25% in one go. You can just take what's required, but there has to be a certain need for it, if you will, an immediate or quantifiable need to take that, so you can maintain your pot and have a comfortable retirement.
And Craig?
I think it's plan. Have a robust plan accounting for not every variable, but as many variables as possible, and ultimately how that plan's going to change over time. Because if you mentioned you could have state pension, you could maybe want more early doors, require less later on, and the more you build in, the more you test that plan, the more that you've got it in place, the better retirement you're going to have ultimately. So that'll be my tip.
Yeah, I agree. Planning's certainly a big thing when it comes to retirement. It makes life a lot easier. Earlier you start the plan, the better. But it doesn't mean if you haven't started yet, it's not the right thing to do. But it certainly is. George, what?
It comes into planning. You know, retirement solutions are long term, and you know, with investment, there's no free lunch, in the sense that you've got to take a degree of risk in order to get an appropriate level of return. And you know, think about what that appropriate level of return is to get you to that goal, and you know, think very carefully about the amount of risk you're taking. You know, there is a risk of taking too little in the market, which you know, a lot of what we see and talk about in mono markets and so on are very short term, in the sense of what is essentially a very long term investment. So you know, get your risk level right, and stay in the market. You know, what we've seen, if we look at our portfolios, is a range of different environments. We've had, you know, war in Europe, we've had a pandemic, we've had one of the fastest interest rate hiking cycles on record. We've had, you know, China-US trade wars, and you know, a European referendum. We've had the full stress test, and you know, our portfolios have delivered strong returns through you know, the accumulation of those different environments. So stay in the market.
Yeah, agree. I think it's not time in the market, it's time in the market. That's the saying. Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you. So some good session. Well, I would just put a plug. You mentioned mono markets there. Worth watching that if you do a few minutes in the morning. Gives you a little bit of understanding of potentially what's going on in the world. As you said, we've had some challenging times in recent months and years. So please do keep an eye out for those. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you found that information useful. Please like and subscribe. Thank you everyone. Have a great weekend.